All right. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Alicia Furlong, and I am one of the assistant directors of financial aid at Siena College. And we're here tonight because I wanted to be able to give you some information, some tips, some tricks on the financial aid process, that part of the college search process. So hopefully your senior is at least starting to think about it. I know I have a senior and it's difficult getting him to talk about it. That's okay. You have plenty of time. Don't stress. Don't let your student stress. Just, stay talking with them. Talk with your guidance office. They're always a big help as well. And if you have any questions, certainly reach out to me. If you have any further financial aid questions, I'd be happy to help you, whether you're thinking about Siena or not. So let's get started with some ideas. So the first thing I want to point out is that I don't want you to get scared away or shy away from the cost of attendance that you see listed on any school's website. Chances are you will receive financial aid that will bring that cost down to a little more reasonable price. And the more the college costs, sometimes the more aid you're eligible for. So make sure that if it seems like a college or student is interested in, and it seems to fit them in every other way, at least to start with, do the application process. Go through the financial aid process. Get your financial aid award letter from each of the colleges that you're interested in and compare them and look at the net costs. Something you can do early on in the process, which you could do now, is something called a net price calculator. So all colleges, most colleges, if not all, will have this calculator tool on their website. And the reason why you want to go to the individual college and use the calculator at each school's website is because it is going to use that college's cost and their aid structure. And it's going to ask you questions that are similar to what you will eventually submit later. And they will be able to give you an estimate of how much the net cost could be for you as a family. So that's a nice tool to get you started. You could do it now. You could do it at multiple schools if you wanted to get an idea. The more questions it asks you, the more accurate the estimate will be. So some of them are more robust than others, but enter in as much as you can, as accurately as you can, and then that will give you a good idea of a starting point. But I just want to say again, pursue the school if you feel like it's a good fit. Don't just call up or look on their website for the total cost and just say that, it's too much, it's out of my range. We're not even going to apply. So that's my first tip, to make sure that you consider that. Now, how do you find out what financial aid is available to you? There are several different applications. Each school is a little bit different. So you do want to pay attention to the schools that you're interested in, and you want to follow their requirements. Some of the major applications are called, one is a Css Profile. That is one. Another one is the Fafsa, which you may have heard about. So I'll go into more detail about the Fafsa in a minute. I just wanted to mention a little bit about the Css Profile. First of all, not every school requires a Css Profile. So if a school that you're interested in does not require it, you don't have to do it. The reason why we say it that way is because it does cost a little bbit to do it. The first one's usually about $25, and then every school after that is, at this point, $16 per school. And it's more robust. It has a lot more questions. It asks you more details. So make sure when you're looking at your list of schools that you're interested in, if one of them requires it, then I guess you do have to do it, but don't add all of the schools unless they require it. So that's one. This one is going to ask you things like income, assets, some of your household expenses. They will ask how many people live in your household. They'll ask a few more questions, mostly a lot more about assets. It is available now. You could start it for your senior. Like I said, not all colleges require it. And each college may have a different deadline. So you do want to, again, pay attention to the school you're interested in, find out what their requirements are, and find out what their deadlines are. Other schools may also have their own financial aid application. Again, each school should list this on their website, so you don't necessarily have to call or email every school. You should be able to find this information on their websites, but just make sure you're paying attention and you're completing everything that they require, because you do want to try to get as much aid as you possibly can. So the other one is FAFSA. FAFSA is the federal application for financial student aid. Sorry. So what you want to do is you want to go to the fafsa.gov website. FAFSA is something that is going to be required by most, if not all, colleges. The government, the federal government, is also going to use that information to determine whether your student is eligible for federal aid. The other thing that it does is that it offers, the federal government will offer a federal student loan. So every freshman who completes the FAFSA will be offered at least $5,500 in a student loan, and then possibly some grants or other types of aid as well. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Right now, I just wanted to mention a few things about the FAFSA to get you started. So what you want to do is you'd go to fafsa.gov. You would look for the 22-23 academic school year, because it goes by the school year. There are also, again, deadlines per school. So you want to make sure that you're following what each school is asking you to do. And the one thing to keep in mind is it is using 2020 tax information. So that may seem strange to you because, by the time they start school next year, that's going to be old information. But that is how the FAFSA works, as well as the Css Profile. It's going to ask for what they call the prior information. And I think the reason why they do that right now, you figure it's October of 2021. The only completed tax return you have is 2020. So in order to get started early and get as much information as you can from the schools as early as possible, you can start that FAFSA now, and you would put in your 2020 tax information. So a couple little tips about the FAFSA. You're going to need to create an FSA ID, and that's going to be for the parent and the student. That's like a user ID. You're going to use it every year, so keep it. Parents, if you have more than one student in college, your parent FSA ID will be the same for all of your students, but your students do need to have their own individual FSA ID. So when you go to the fafsa.gov website, if you're starting from the beginning, it will give you a couple options. One is I'm completing this as a parent on behalf of my student, and one is I'm completing it as a student. I am a student, I'm completing this. Then it will ask you several questions from there. Ultimately, if it's a dependent student, you will still need to create the FSA ID for the parent before you can finish completely. That is also a way for them to verify information with those Social Security Administration to verify identity. And then also, like I said, it's going to be your username and password that you're going to use for the future. When you're in the FAFSA, keep in mind that the FAFSA itself is an application for the student. So anytime there's a reference to you, it does mean student. If it's a parent question, it will specifically say parent. So just be careful of that. Make sure if you are the parent and you're entering all the information for both, you're being very careful as to how you're answering. A lot of people will answer the first few questions for the student as the parent, because the questions are you married? What is your marital status? Do you have any dependents? But it's talking to the student. So be careful that you're answering applicably there. Now, determining who should be on the FAFSA. If you have different or unique situations with your household, you'll want to read the help file in the FAFSA, because it is pretty detailed and it tells you who needs to be on the FAFSA with the student. A couple little things here. For example, if married or remarried, you will answer the questions for both parents. You do only need one parent to have an FSA ID, but that parent who's logged in will answer all the questions for both parents. In a scenario where at the current time that you're completing the FAFSA, the parents are divorced or separated, the only parent that needs to be entered into the FAFSA is the parent that the student lives with more than half of the year in the past 12 months. So and the other little thing, if you do share custody, then you can do the parent that provides the majority of the student's support financially. That's what the FAFSA would like you to do. Now, if you're the, let's say the student lives with the mother and the mother is remarried and there is a, say, stepfather, that spouse does need to be entered as well, but you wouldn't enter the biological father in that scenario. If you have any questions about that, please let me know. Also, going to the fafsa.gov website, there are lots of tips in the help questions that helps with that as well. So another thing to look out for when you're doing the FAFSA, it is going to ask you for your income information. And as I mentioned, it's going to use 2020's tax information. It's good to have in front of you your federal tax returns from 2020. You also want to have your W-2s, and you want to have an idea of your assets. So that means your checking, your savings balances. It does not require retirement income, and it does not require you to enter anything about your primary home. Now the Css Profile does. So that's an example of some additional questions that that's going to ask you. So you do want to have some of that information with you if you're going to be doing the Css Profile. But there is a feature inside the FAFSA called the IRS Data Retrieval tool. That's helpful if you can use that, because what it'll do is it will go out to the IRS website, it will match up and find your tax return, and it will pull back in all of the data from the tax return, and you won't have to enter it yourself. You will still have to enter some information from your W-2s, so that's why you do have to have those with you as well. If you can get that IRS retrieval to work, that saves you time. It's more accurate. It really does help. It helps the school in the end too. It just makes things a little more smoother if you can do it. And I say if, because if your name has changed or if your tax returns have a different address or something like that, it may not be able to match up that information. So if that's the case, you would use your federal tax returns and you'd have to enter them all individually. But the FAFSA is really good about telling you which line to take it from. So you know exactly, line 1, Schedule C, line this, it tells you everything. So you should be able to still enter it as long as you're careful and you read the questions. Now, when you're doing the FAFSA, you can do it a couple different ways. You can start with just one school, and then you can go back later and add more schools as your student figures out additional schools that they're interested in. Or the first time in, you can enter all the schools that he or she may be interested in, even if they haven't applied. So you can do the FAFSA before the application, or you can do the FAFSA after. You can go in multiple times, you can add more schools. The only thing you can't do when you go back in is if you did use the IRS retrieval, you wouldn't be able to change any of the income. But if you did determine that you made a mistake on the assets, or if you did manually enter the income and you found that you made a mistake, you can go back in and fix those mistakes and resubmit. The Css Profile does not let you go back in. So you can only go in once. So you do want to be careful about how you're entering it the first time. And you do want to be careful about which schools you're entering there as well. And again, you only want to pick the schools that require a Css Profile for that one. So what does the FAFSA do? Why do you do a FAFSA? Who uses it? What do they do with it? As I mentioned, the FAFSA is technically a federal application. So what the first thing that happens is the federal government calculates everything you entered. It takes, for example, the adjusted gross income, total tax paid. Those are some information. Those are some of the things they got from your tax returns. Family size, how many people live in your household, how many are in college or going to be in the next year, and then the assets. So those are the main items that it's using. It's going to calculate all that. There's a formula that it uses, and it comes up with a number that they call an expected family contribution, or you'll hear it called an EFC. So that is, it's a dollar amount, but it's not meant to tell you exactly what you will pay. It's meant for the government to say, this is what I think you can afford for this student for the first school year. They're going to use that information to determine where you fall in their eligibility for different types of aid. So one of the things that they may offer is a federal Pell Grant. That one does not have to be paid back, but the eligibility for it is a little bit smaller of a window. So some people may not be eligible for it, and some people may. That's part of this evaluation. The second thing that happens is that that is sent to those schools that you put in the FAFSA. So if you put 10 schools, all 10 schools are going to get a copy of your FAFSA. They're going to use that information to determine whether you're eligible for aid from the school as well. So every school will know if you're eligible for Pell, and every school will show you the same Pell amount because that is from the FAFSA. But every school is going to use that information and put it in with their own aid structure and decide how much they want to offer you based on that. So that's kind of what it's doing. It's taking all that information you entered and it's putting you in a position to be able to evaluate it for mostly for need-based aid. That's what they call that when it's based on your finances. So what happens if the information in the FAFSA, being almost 2 years old, is not representing your current situation? You absolutely should reach out to any school that you either sent the FAFSA to, or any school that you're interested in considering when you get a little bit further down the road. Because what can happen is the schools individually have the ability to review any kind of special circumstance that changes the information that was put into the FAFSA. So, when you do the FAFSA, you have to put in your 2020 information. We all know 2020 was a very rough year for a lot of people. You may not have the same job you had in 2020. So what you can do is you reach out to the school, you explain your situation. Certainly losing a job is an example. Taking a different job that has less income, that's another example. I mentioned divorce and separation. So if after you submit the FAFSA, then there is a separation. Now the FAFSA has both parents' information, and that is technically not the current circumstances. So that's another example where you could reach out and say, this is what changed. The school will take that information, they will review the FAFSA, they'll change it, and they'll see if you might possibly be eligible for additional aid. So stay in communication with the college, call them up, send an email. Details are always helpful, and just talk about it. Finances are kind of a tough thing for people to talk about sometimes, especially when you're dealing with a loss of some sort. But if you can reach out to the school, talk about it with them and let them have the opportunity to be able to help you and give you additional aid. This is also something you can do any school year, so it's not just about the first time. It is something you do want to talk about with the schools the first time before you decide which college you want to go to. But even if it's the second year, mid-year, sophomore year, in the middle of the first semester, you still want to reach out because it's possible that an adjustment can still be made and you could receive some additional aid. So after the colleges receive your FAFSA and the student has been accepted, they will prepare a financial aid package. Now, this will come in all different shapes and sizes, and it will look very different from school to school. So you want to be able to really look at what you're receiving, review it very carefully, and make sure you're understanding every bit of it. And if not, call the school, ask them to go through it with you in detail. This is an example here of one of our letters. It's just the way we do it. Again, everybody does it a little bit differently. Some things that will always be on every letter that you receive, though, would be the cost of attendance. They're going to list there what the estimated cost is. Depending on whether you're a resident or commuter, that number could be different. And you'll want to understand what is in that number. What is that including? So again, either it'll show you in the letter or the attachment. In our case, it has an attachment, or you call up and you talk through it. Another thing that this package will always show you is what are the scholarships and grants that your student has been awarded. There's all different kinds of scholarships and grants based on different things. So one they call academic or merit. So that one is more based on the student's academic performance up to that point. So for example, at Siena, when you apply and you get accepted, the admissions team is also determining based on, I guess at that point would be like end of year, junior year, cumulative GPA, for example. Sometimes class rank can play a part. Sometimes SATs can play a part. Those kinds of information, that's all being put together and you're going to be offered a merit scholarship. Some schools may have different requirements for that. They may not offer them to every student. So those are some of the things you want to find out, and they would be inside your financial aid award letter. Other types of grants, we talked about a little bit, the federal Pell. So if you were eligible for federal Pell, it would be listed here on this letter. New York State also has state-specific grants. One most popular is called TAP, New York State TAP. So that is something that when you complete the FAFSA, if the FAFSA thinks you're eligible, and some of that means you've lived in New York State for at least 12 months, you put at least one school in your FAFSA that's in New York, there's some other criteria, it will pop up a message at the end, it's actually over to the side, and it'll say, do you want to also apply for New York State TAP? And you can click a button and it will take some of your information from the FAFSA and put it over into the TAP application. That's the first part, but there is another step that you'll have to do on the HESC website, which is the HESC. That's the company, the agency that monitors the TAP application, approves the TAP application, and gives you your award. Now, New York State also has other types of awards. They have a New York State Merit. There's Excelsior. There are other types of grants and scholarships that you may be eligible for through New York State. You want to make sure that you're looking for that. You could go right to the HESC website and just make sure you're looking at all of the different options there and taking advantage of as much as you can. Now, if you're going to go to a SUNY school, there are grants that you could be eligible for through New York State website. If you're going to a private school, perhaps you may not be eligible for as many. So that's something, again, you can read through and make sure you're matching up and you're looking for as much as you possibly can. So the other thing that the financial aid award letter is going to show you, if you did the FAFSA, you will be offered the loan. So the loan will be on the letter. The way Siena does it is we happen to split it out separately so that we can clearly show you the difference between your costs without loans and your costs with loans. Every letter is different, so make sure you're looking at them all line by line and you understand which are grants, scholarships, loans. Then there will be this net cost. So it'll show you an estimated cost that you will be responsible for that first year, given that information. That's usually what a financial aid award letter package will include. Some of them will also include federal work study if your student is eligible. That is through the federal government, but it is also based on criteria that the college has as well. So if you're eligible for it, it should be on the letter. If it is on the letter for your student, you do want to make sure you're understanding it a little bit more. Every school does that a little differently as well. Some schools will give the student a job directly. Some schools will say that the student needs to find a job on campus. In some cases, the pay that the student earns goes right on the tuition bill. In some cases, it's a paycheck. So it's a nice feature. It's a nice benefit to have, but you do want to make sure you're understanding the specifics behind it. The other thing that is not going to be on the letter offered from the college, but is something that you could look into is, you can apply, or your student can apply for outside scholarships from any resource. Your guidance office probably posts some information there for you. You could search on it. There's a couple of websites that I know are popular. One is fastweb.com. Another one is collegeboard.org. If you did an SAT, you're familiar with that website. Also, student loan companies. That's something that not everyone knows about. So whether or not you take a loan with a student loan company, they do tend to have scholarships. So you can apply, your student can apply through there as well. So if you do apply for and receive outside scholarships, they're not necessarily going to be shown to you at this time. You would consider that money to come off of that bottom line, that net cost that is your responsibility. Those additional scholarships would just help with that. What are some other options to be able to pay for that bottom line? So we mentioned the net cost. We mentioned the federal loan. So again, federal student loan is going to automatically be offered just by doing the FAFSA. Your student can accept it or decline it. You don't have to take it, but it will be offered. The federal government also has a parent loan option. They call it a Parent Plus loan, but it is not automatic. It's something that you will have to complete an application. Every school does that a little bit differently too. Schools may ask you to fill out an application in their school related to the Parent Plus loan, or you may just go to the federal government's website directly and apply through there. Another loan option would be what they call private lenders. So that's going to be more like a bank, a credit union, a student loan company, such as Sallie Mae, Discover, Citizens. There's many of them out there. You as a student or parent will go and pick a company, do the application, in the application, you'll tell them your school. So again, this is a little down the road, but these are options you could look into now. They will directly pay the school and it will go towards your bill. A lot of these loans, you'll have the option of deferment. So that means that you could choose to not make a payment while the student is in school. The student loan automatically is deferred. You may be eligible, the student may be eligible for a subsidized portion of a loan. If so, that portion won't even accrue any interest. So that's a nice loan. It's in the student's name. It's interest-free until they get out of school. You could always pay it off early if you wanted to as well. The other ones aren't going to have that option, but they will have the deferment, and they'll have other options too. Some may have an option to pay $50 a month all while the student's in school, and it will save you, a certain amount of interest in the long run. Typically, a first-year student anyway will probably require a co-signer. Doesn't have to be a parent. It just needs to be somebody who has steady income and credit score and a decent credit history. That's something that is usually required at least of a first-year student, sometimes second as well. Sometimes by third and fourth year, the companies may not necessarily require a co-signer, but that's going to be up to and decided by each individual company. They're going to have their own risk factors and they're going to consider that when you apply and when they do their approval. The other thing is, so instead of a loan, many schools will have a monthly payment plan. So the way that works is it typically won't have any interest. There may be a fee. Siena charges, I think it's $35 per semester to be enrolled in the payment plan. But what that means is it gives you the option, instead of having to pay in one large payment or two large payments, you could pay ultimately up to 12 months throughout the year. It's a nice way to take your portion and spread it out. You also always have the option of combining any of those options. So if you can do a monthly payment plan, but you can only do, you can't do as much to cover the whole net cost, you could do a part of a loan and then you could do part of the monthly payment. I also put on here home equity. I just put that on there just to mention it. If you have equity in your home and you wanted to do an application that way, it's not a direct education loan, but it certainly is another option. It might be something that gets you a lower rate. You might be able to get a decent rate. And then you would just pay the school directly yourselves in that case, but just putting it on there just as another thought. So why are you going to put all this money into your students' education? You want to look at it as an investment. Basically, you're investing in their future, or they are if they're taking out the loan themselves. But why would you even want your student to have a loan as well? So some of the things you want to look into might be, is it worth it to pay more for a certain school compared to another school? So, a SUNY is going to possibly be less expensive than a private four-year school, depending on the aid, depending on your package, depending on where you get to that bottom line. But if you are faced with looking at 3 different schools and you're getting to the end and your student likes all of them, they have the major they're looking for, otherwise fit your student very well, but you're concerned about the finances, or the student is concerned about the finances and you're comparing them, there's other things to look at that might help you determine that you will get a return on your investment. Some of the factors that we like to point out might be something like retention rate. So retention rate, that's something that it shows what percentage of students returned after the first year. And the reason why that one could be a good factor for you to look at is because it might give you an indication of, yeah, the student decided to go to that college. They were wooed, by the admissions team, but how much did that school meet that student's expectations enough to keep them interested in wanting to come back? So it's, you want to look at this investment. If you're going to look at a 4-year school, you want to look at this as a 4-year plan as much as you possibly can. If your student isn't ready for that, that's completely fine. You start out with a 2-year school, potentially with the transferring to another school later. You still want to kind of think of that now. I know it seems crazy to think of, that many years all at once, and some students aren't ready to do that, but when you're talking financially, you want to consider that. Another thing to think about is, how many students do graduate in that 4 years? If it's supposed to be a 4-year plan, what is the percentage of students that graduate from that school in 4 years? And the reason why that's important is because you want to know if that school, again, meets your expectations and helps that student complete their plan, instead of keeping them longer and longer for more years. So those are some things that you can consider as far as the support that you're getting from the school, the guidance, the academic advising that happens. You could consider that percentage rate from each school to be indicators of that. Another one is a default rate. So that's referring to the loans. So every school has to report all of these details. So you can find this information anywhere. It's public information. And the lower the default rate, the better. It means that the percentage of students that left the school and were not able to make loan payments. So they defaulted on their loan. So again, you want to see a lower default rate, meaning we relate this to the student possibly then had higher chances of job placement, higher salaries. That student left that school in a position to be able to get a job they put them in a position to be able to pay their loans timely. So again, those are kind of related to the next two, with the idea that it shows you the structure of that school. Did the student just get in the door and then, wasn't taken care of the rest of the time? Or is that school really known for preparing that student for their future? After all, that is, especially as a parent, I imagine one of the things you're focusing on, especially with cost being a factor. Is this school putting my student in a position to be successful in the future? Some resources that you can go to for this information: College Scorecard, College Navigator, College Factual, also each college's website. But these three here are generic websites that are, this information is reported to. They receive that information and they tally all that up for you. So that's available to you if you want as well. All right, so that is kind of the overview of the financial aid process. I do strongly, recommend or offer any other assistance that you guys might want through this process. Please reach out. Don't hesitate to email me, ask me any questions. Does not have to be about Siena specifically. I would be happy to help you with anything. I am a parent of a senior right now as well, so I'm going through it from that perspective. So I'd be happy to share anything that I can with you as well. In summary, I would like to just remind you a couple things. So FAFSA is important. You want to do the FAFSA, probably the sooner the better. The schools all have different deadlines. You want to keep an eye on that, make sure you meet all the requirements, but you're going to receive a financial aid package sooner and have a better idea of the cost of that school if you can get that FAFSA in sooner. So you do want to focus on that if you haven't started it already. You want to communicate with your school, especially if you have any changes or any concerns about what you think has been entered into the FAFSA. If you feel like it's not representing your situation, make sure you reach out and talk to them. And then when you do get financial aid packages from all of the schools, that might not be till December, January, but you want to look at all of them, compare them, make sure you're understanding everything. When you're looking at scholarships that have been offered, what are the requirements to continue those scholarships from year to year? Do you have to have a GPA minimum ongoing? Those are things you want to make sure you're understanding. They should be providing you with that information, possibly in an attachment, possibly in a terms and conditions type of document, but you want to read all that small print. You want to understand exactly what you're looking at. So those are my tips. If anyone has any questions, please let me know. I'm going to just, let's see, we'll end the recording and that way we can talk.